NVIDIA today had their launch event for 40 series graphic cards. The event itself only had about 20 minutes dedicated to the actual 40 series cards, so I'm just going to go over that portion. At the end, I'm going to also give my recommendation, and there will be some pricing as well. So the RTX Ray Tracing, which has been around for a while, now they're just making it faster by 2 or 3 times, whatever that means, by the original version of the 3090 series or the 3000 series. The 3000 series supposedly is supposed to be 2 to 3 times slower than the 4000 series. They didn't really show an exact number-to-number comparison here. We have to kind of just take their word for it that it is faster on ray tracing itself. They did show some ray tracing, but again, there wasn't really performance numbers when it came to that. I would really like to see the numbers that are actually compared to the last generation card to see actually if they really are 2 to 3 or 4 times faster than what they're claiming. SER, which is shader execution reordering, is for reorganizing how the shading is handled in memory before processing. Processing similar shades together speeds up the rendering times basically by reorganizing the memory before it's actually rendered out. The new feature really is DLSS 3, which is your deep learning super resolution, and that's in most of the games. Currently is on DLSS 2, which is in most games, but they are going to probably going to have DLSS 3. A little definition of DLSS 3, deep learning super resolution. It takes the previous low res frame and the previous high res frame to predict the new frame that's going to render and how it's going to organize it. It then creates an intermediate frames between them to determine the output frame, which then allows for faster frame rates because it's predicting the next movement before it happens or the next set of outcomes. This is a very long definition. I believe that this is more complicated than it really needs to be. It just basically is doing predictive frame rendering, and based on the predictive frame rendering, you can actually be able to predict the next frame from the previous frame. NVIDIA shows a graph of DLSS 3, but only compares DLSS off to DLSS 3 on, which is not a really good comparison because they're not showing DLSS 2.0 or 2 to DLSS 3. How much more improved DLSS 3 is over DLSS 2. Right now they're only showing off and then DLSS 3 on, and then they're showing you the frame rate differences. Of course the frame rates are going to show as a really big improvement because that's the whole point of DLSS in itself, is that it actually allows you to have more predictive frames and faster frame rates based on that prediction. Honestly, this doesn't mean much to me unless they have the proper comparison. So I'm really going to say that that doesn't really make a big deciding factor here. But I would like to see charts from 2 to 3. Specs, pricing, and availability for the 4090 is going to be 24 gigabytes of GDDR memory, 2 to 4 times faster than the 3090 Ti based on what they were saying, selling at $1,599 MSRP and available on October 12th. This is for the Founders Edition card only. This is not from other board partners. This is directly from NVIDIA. The next one, 4080, specs, pricing, and availability for the 4080 in 2 different specs. Basically, you have the 16 gig version and the 12 gig version. The 16 gigabyte version is supposed to be 2 to 4 times faster than the 3080 Ti, selling at $1,199, available in November. The 12 gig edition is selling at $899, available also in November. Again, the pricing for this is only based on the Founders Edition, which you know that the Partners Edition is going to be a little bit more expensive. Let's go over a little bit of the looks of the card and the sizing of the card. The new cards are a lot bigger. They consume a lot more space in the system. It's a chunky boy, I'm going to be honest. It's a really chunky card, and it's going to be a hard time to fit that even in a full-size desktop computer, because you're going to be now taking up probably about 3 slots in the back of the machine. And if you have a regular micro ATX motherboard, you may be covering other slots that you may or may not need later. And it also depends on your motherboard size, because if your motherboard's a full ATX motherboard, you'll have plenty of other slots that are further down that would be away from the first first primary slot. But this should be something that you need to consider. The length of the card also should be something that you consider. That will also be a really big impact on building a smaller build versus a larger build. If you have a very large case, again, this has nothing to do with probably anything. You'll probably be able to fit this with no problem. But if you have a much smaller case or even a much shorter length case, you may have a hard time fitting this card in, especially for the amount of cooling it requires and a lot more airflow that it requires. More power is also required for the 40 series as any other card. When you go up in better processors usually, and I say processors, I mean GPU processors, you're still going to require more power. And this is no different, but if you have a 30 series card, or if you're doing even a new build, you may want to consider a more beefier power supply. You may want to consider going into the more ranges of like 800 watts or 1000 watts. I'm going to get down to the actual total power consumption. So if you're going to consider a new build or a previous build, you may have to double check your power supply. If you're running a power supply that's under 700 watts, which is the bare minimum, look at your power supply sticker, and make sure that it has full continuous power at a decent rate. I would definitely recommend something over 700 watts because the minimum is 700, so I'd probably recommend more of an 800 watt power supply, even if you're getting the lowest end power supply. Lowest end card, I mean. 4080, 12 gigabyte graphic card still requires a minimum of 700, so I'd probably still go to 800 even with that lower end card. So here's the real power requirements. 4090, it says it uses 450 watts of power, minimum 850 watt power supply. If you're doing an 850 watt power supply, I'd probably recommend going to a 1000 watt power supply. The next card below it, 4080 16 gigabyte version, is 320 watt power supply, minimum 750 watt power supply. Again, go a little bit over spec if you are concerned with your power supply popping on you because you are playing a game and it gets a little too overwhelmed for the power supply. You'll want to have that extra little bit of room just in case so you can go over. 4080 12 gigabyte, their requirements are 285 watts of power, minimum 700 watt power supply. Go a little bit above. If you're at 700, go to 800. If you're at 750, go to 850. Add an extra 100. If you're at 850, then go to 950 or 1000. My recommendation, if you're upgrading and you're going from a 30 series to a 40 series, I would wait. I would wait till you see actual real results before you go to actually go purchase this. I would not be the first person to purchase this on your block just because you're like, oh, I want the newest and greatest. I mean, if you want to, go ahead, but no one's stopping you. But you're probably throwing away money because of the fact that you may or may not even be able to support the card, number one, and then number two, you may also have a problem with the fact that it's not going to be much of a performance increase. You may not see it also until all the other games kind of catch up with DLSS 3, which may be a while. So I would wait for performance numbers first before purchasing the 40 series. Now, if you're buying a new card and you can wait and you're not in a rush, then I say wait till the launch happens, and even a little bit after launch, and make the determination based on the real numbers, real performance numbers. And if you need to even want to go 40 series, you may end up saying to yourself the performance difference and the price difference may not equate, and you may end up saying to yourself, I could get a 30 series for a little less money and still play the same titles and still have the same performance. If you don't have a graphic card at all and you need a new graphic card, nothing really hurts you by going to the 40 series directly if you want, because the 40 series is going to be a newer generation. It's going to be obviously a little bit better performance, but how much more are you going to get past the 30 series? I don't know. We don't know until we get the actual real cards in our hands, and that's not coming out for a while. So if you can wait, I would wait. If you can't wait, then, and if you need to buy one today as of filming, just buy a 30 series and be happy with it. Most of the 30 series cards will still play most of the brand new titles just as good. There's nothing really architecturally different except for the DLSS 3 compared to the DLSS 2. If you're asking me today by purchasing it, would I upgrade? I have a 30 series card. Do I really want to look at a 40 series card? I don't see a reason to, but Again, I'm not a really high-end user when it comes to that, so even having a 30 series is probably overkill for me. But you have to look at your situation. If you want to find out and say, hey, do a lot of these new titles support DLSS 3, then the 40 series makes sense. If the new titles aren't going to support DLSS 3, or the titles that you're playing aren't going to support DLSS 3, or not even taking advantage of it, there really is no need to change. And the rest of it was spent, all the rest of the hour they were spending on new AI stuff, new technical terms, new APIs, and new API improvements. I'm not going to go over that in this video. I may make another separate video for that if anybody really is interested in all of that. It really is high-end stuff. They're talking about self-driving cars and improvements to industrial fields. That's it for this video. Please like, subscribe. Stay tuned for another few upcoming events. We will also have the new AMD processors that are coming out next week. So we're going to try to snag one, hopefully, if we can, and we're going to try to snag a new motherboard as well. But yeah, like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.